At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Here in Greenville County, we have 8 different places where a 911 call can be answered.
It is the largest county in South Carolina. It's a challenge.
The type of information that a telecommunicator gets from Radius Plus is location-based technology. You can see where the caller is, if they have a medical issue, if they speak a different language. They're immediately able to text to that caller in their native language. It reduces response times because it immediately gets first responders where they need to be.
Carbine, it's multimedia. You can get text, translate to whatever language, getting away with the legacy equipment and going into a cloud-based solution.
It's the first time in U.S. history that we have an EZNet through cloud-native call handling.
As a police officer, to have the victim go video, that's unheard of.
You're getting upgrades every month, not every year.
To schedule your free Carbine demo, please visit carbine.com/WTT.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned. Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo of the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be episode 449 of Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Lived Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine, and a big shout out to patrons. As always, thank you for everything. This episode here is actually going to be part of the Imagine Listening session that I did just a few weeks ago at the National NENA Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. Big shout out to NENA, as well as all of the attendees, everyone who joined me for this session and shared stories. It was a very powerful, impactful session, as always. And the stories, as I said already, powerful, but also some hard ones. So, there's also a warning, that for those who are watching and listening, if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening and watching at your own risk. And these stories are all true, and they come from the dispatchers who lived them. Again, this is part of Imagine Listening. So if you've been to an Imagine Listening session, you know that the first 30 minutes or so are all I Am 911 stories. And they're dispatchers sharing some of the harder stories, but also some saves. And then, of course, the next episode that'll be coming out, 450, will be the open mic part of that, which will be the lighter side of dispatch. Some of the funny stuff that happens in 911, because I'm a firm believer that laughing is good medicine. So without further ado, here is episode 449 of the Within the Trenches podcast, and this is Imagine Listening. Imagine watching your son take off on his four-wheeler. You've witnessed this many times. He rides, he has fun, and all is well. Now imagine you are 911, taking a call from frantic parents who have just found their son underneath his flipped four-wheeler. You listen to the parents scream while they remove it off his body. You tell them that help is on the way, and you give them CPR instructions. An officer arrives, and you listen as he performs CPR.
Come on, buddy. Come on, is what you hear over the phone. This is what it's like within the trenches of 911. In this episode, you will hear stories from the I Am 911 movement, a movement that I started to fight the reclassification of dispatchers from clerical to protective to bring awareness to the types of calls that 911 dispatchers answer on a daily basis. This is an Imagine Listening session, and we are here together in person at the 2022 National NENA Conference in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, you heard the warning at the beginning, but I must warn you again and add that if you suffer from PTSD or have suicidal tendencies, you are listening at your own risk. The stories you're about to hear are all true and come from the dispatchers who live them. While some stories have a good outcome, the majority are horrifying. This is our reality. Your worst day is our everyday. So let's start with a bang. I want you to imagine each story. Become the dispatcher who has taken each call and imagine listening. Now I'll start out. That introduction, that was my call. That was actually the story that started the entire I Am 911 movement. I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler. Hashtag I Am 911. And when I put that story out there, a few days later, I was watching a show on Netflix. And one of the pivotal scenes of this show, there was a sheriff who was doing CPR on a kid, on a teenager. And he was saying the exact same thing that I had heard. But at the time, I didn't make that correlation. I lost it. I was crying. I didn't know why. Of course, it was a powerful scene, but I was very emotional. And then it clicked. The reason was because I was seeing it, where before I was hearing all of it. I had a trigger. At that time, I had been out of dispatch about 3 or 4 years. But the shit sticks with us, right? The reason I share these stories is because it becomes easier, because I want you to feel that you can share yours as well. So does anyone have a story they would like to share?
Your dad stabbed your mom in a fit of rage. You called 911 as you sheltered with your sister in a bedroom and blocked the door. Your mom got out of the house. You didn't know where your dad went. Officers forced entry only to realize your dad started the house on fire. Officers got you and your sister out and safely away from the house. Your dad appeared out of the shadows with a large knife. The words, "shots fired," came over the radio. More radio calls for medical. You, your sister, and your mom were safe. The officers were safe. The horror of the situation sticks with me. I'm happy to keep up with your life and growth from afar. You don't know me, but I cheer you on. I am 911. May of 2019. I just overheard one of our officers in the police agency's active shooter at the STEM school. Immediately, we, a secondary PSAP, are on high alert. We are mobilizing fire and EMS before the law agency can even call us. I am on phones this day with one phone partner. We start getting calls from inside and around the school. Kids who have been shot. I have a young man with a gunshot wound that is bleeding heavily. He ran from the school and was standing in a stranger's yard. The homeowner took the phone from the patient, and I start to give bleeding control instructions. In the meantime, a young lady calls. She is sheltered in place in the library. She was bleeding from her thigh where she'd been shot. Managed to give instructions to another student on how to tie a sweater above the wound like a tourniquet. In the background, the school announcement kept playing. Active shooter. This is not a drill. Take shelter. These kids were terrified and crying. I was crying. I kept having to put these kids on hold to answer more calls. It made me feel terrible. I felt like I was abandoning these kids every time. Luckily, they both survived, but I still feel guilty. They're just kids. I am 911. I was the one who answered the phone the night your boyfriend killed your mother. I heard the fear in your voice as you gave your address and then told me that your mother was not okay. I asked my questions. You said your boyfriend and mother had gotten in an argument, and then your boyfriend came out of the bedroom and stabbed your mother in the neck. As I worked through my medical protocols and then started giving instruction to control the bleeding, you kept saying there was just so much blood. I told you to continue applying firm, steady pressure. We were on the phone together for 10 minutes until crews arrived. It was only later, after speaking with one of the officers on scene, did I learn that what your boyfriend had actually done was basically cut your mother's head off. I'm sorry that you had to live through that, and that we weren't able to help save your mom. I am 911. Getting multiple shots fired calls. Officers respond to the area looking for the suspect and any victims. Officer comes on the radio advising more shots being fired. I could hear shots in the background on the radio. At that time, the officer called in. An innocent female driving by was hit by a stray bullet and was fatally injured. She had 4 children from high school on down. The family came into the lobby, and all I could do was say I was sorry and just cry along with them. I am 911. Received a call for a 3-year-old that had accidentally shot herself in the stomach. She lived in a rural part of the county, and response time would be extended. I heard the instructions the medical dispatcher gave. I heard your cries turn to whimpers, then gurgles. I heard you take your last breath, knowing there would be nothing that could be done. I am 911. You told me your address, one of the hardest street names in the county to spell. I was annoyed. You were calm. I asked, tell me exactly what happened. My son is having a hard time breathing. I asked further questions. Your son wasn't breathing. He was 1 year old. We started CPR. I stayed in the line until officers arrived. The AED was applied and delivered a shock. I heard them usher the parents out. The line disconnected. Your son was rushed to the hospital, and he didn't make it. I lived with the guilt that I had done something wrong. I should have started CPR sooner. There was a debriefing, and I learned that your son had an underlying heart condition no one knew about. There was nothing anyone could do, but I still feel guilty. I am 911. Got a call from a 3-year-old found in the pool by her mother. Mom was screaming and crying, begging for help, begging for me to help her. I started to instruct Mom to open her airway and start compressions. We made it through one round of compressions when an officer arrived on scene. Thankfully, this was in town, and he was right around the corner. However, they had no idea how long she was in the pool. Unfortunately, she didn't make it. They talked about me at the funeral. I will never forget you. I am 911. You called 911 from a landline, sobbing. You said you found your husband, and you believed he shot himself. I conferenced with medical, providing them with the address as soon as you were reassured medical and police were on their way. You began screaming hysterically. I found your husband's driver's license picture to let medical dispatch know your husband's age. The medical dispatcher and I stayed on the phone with you for over 10 minutes trying to get the information. Your grief-stricken screams still hold residency in my mind, right next to your husband's picture. I am 911. I got a call from a suicidal male crying, stating that he couldn't do it anymore, that he had a gun and was in a car. I was trying to obtain his location and whether or not he was parked or driving. He said it doesn't matter. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. He was crying uncontrollably and disconnected. Through phase 2, I could tell he was at a busy intersection. Not 2 seconds later, 911 was ringing off the hook, reporting a male had got out of his car in the middle of the intersection and shot himself in the head. That male that shot himself was the male that had just hung up on me. I still hear his cries and wonder if I could have said something to save him. I am 911. I was only 18, just beginning my dispatch career. You were a veteran that told me you couldn't get the help you needed. You were calm, so calm and confident when you asked for the coroner. I broke the rules and gave you my name, trying anything to keep you alive. You assured me that it was okay. You were ready to die. As the police approached your door, you laid the phone down and put your dear rifle to your chest and pulled the trigger. You were the first call I cried over. I am 911. Those were just a few stories from Imagine Listening, the ones that were written down and submitted during that session. The following is the audio of those who shared stories out loud.
So 2017 in my town, very early morning, 8 a.m., get a call from a frantic mother who has received a call from her child. Basically, he's saying goodbye to her, and he's on his way to his middle school to take as many as he can take with him. We get the call just minutes before he arrives. He arrives with a duffel bag full of weapons that he stole from the family gun cabinet. Officers arrive in time to see him shoot out the exterior door and go in. We get lots of officers on the scene. Of course, it's chaotic. There are 4 of us. We've got officers, firefighters. We're trying to get everyone there. We're trying to alert SROs. We're trying to do everything we can. And just for some perspective, we're sitting there with dispatchers whose husbands are running in the school behind him, dispatchers whose children are in that school. So we're trying to manage that. We're taking 911 calls from students, from teachers. They're hearing the guns. We're locking down the school. We're doing everything we can. And then I get a call from the principal, who is sheltered in place in her office because she has CCTV. Now, he's gotten himself up in a stairwell. He can't get past the locked door at the top. He can't come back down because the officers are down there. And they can't see him, but they're down there. So I'm on the phone with the principal, and I had no other options. I say to her, ma'am, I need you to be our eyes. I need you to be our eyes. I need you to tell me what you see. And we do this, and she's telling me, and he's firing down the stairs at them, and they're trying to duck him, and they can't see him. They can't neutralize him. And she's telling us all this and describing that she's seen him with sort of a forlorn look on his face and sit down on the floor, and then she sees what she thinks is a pool of blood because he's ended it himself. And the trauma from that, from going through it, B, from knowing so many of the people who are in danger in there, and C, from basically forcing her to go through it for the greater good. There was no other option. Kind of it just leaves you in a really weird place. You're very proud that you reacted appropriately and that you got everything, you saved lives. There was only one loss of life that day, and it was his. And it's such a mixture of feelings because you're proud and you're grateful and you're, shameful in some ways because you feel grateful because somebody did die. I mean, yes, he had horrible intentions, but he was also, come to find out, a pretty messed up kid. So that's my story.
Thank you very much for sharing that.
So several years ago, before I became the center manager, when I was working out on the floor, I took a call from I think she was 5 years old at the time, a little girl telling me that her house was filling up with smoke. She couldn't wake up mom or dad. As you can tell, it still affects me to this day, but it was before we had the ability to locate cell phones. And of course, she didn't know her address. She had a little brother with her. We tried everything we could do to get her to give us an address, go next door to the neighbors. Mom and Dad said, I can't leave the house. That kind of thing. She would not leave the house. It has a great outcome. We wound up getting the fire department at least close enough. They knocked on a neighbor's door. She was able to tell me her dad's name, and we were, the fire department asked the neighbor, do you know this person? And they said, yeah, he lives 3 houses down. And they got to the right house. Mom and Dad were both unconscious from smoke inhalation. Thank God they both lived. But to this day, I still hear that cry for help from that little girl.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Sorry, I'm crying already. So we dispatch for very rural areas, and we received a call from a farm that had, it's a family farm, so it had 2 different residents on it, about a half a mile apart. Received a call from a woman who was crying very hard, screaming. Took a while to get out of her what happened, but her daughter's house had started on fire, and her daughter and her daughter's husband and their daughter got out. but their 4-year-old did not. Dad had third-degree burns from trying to get him out. He dropped him in the home and couldn't find him again and thought he got out, and he didn't. And then Grandma told us that Grandpa was in the basement with his shotgun because he was supposed to pick up that 4-year-old a half hour earlier, and he got busy. It wasn't a good outcome, but we got people there as fast as we could. And Grandpa, they got him to put the gun down, so we didn't lose another life that day. So, and that one will sit with me forever.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think for me, Friday, I flew here on Saturday, but Friday before, I had a sit-along coming that day. Fortunately, she wasn't there when this occurred. She's one of our new reserve deputies, but the reality was that morning, a 911 got transferred. Sadly, it shouldn't have probably been transferred to us. And the person who did it is a personal friend at a different PSAP, and she still feels bad. But again, that's just the reality of who we are as people. But it was a 911 open line. It had come in as a hang-up. Fortunately, before they called back, the lady called again, but she was just screaming, just that scream. And so they assumed it's got to be law enforcement only. We'll get it over to the county. So the transfer comes in, and it's just the screaming. But through the screams, and again, I think this is sometimes of just a different voice all of a sudden snapped her out of her loop of where she was. And she said, he's blue. And I hate that. You know, no one wants to give CPR instructions. Fortunately, I've never had to do them with a kiddo before. But when we finally got her calmed down, did the address, the phone number, we're going in, I find out it's 2-month-old. And I have an 8-month-old. And it quickly starts to become more realistic, but the screaming and all of it. But as the county, our deputies are never 2 minutes away. I'm just grateful that they were. It sucks that it was the trainee who just has a young kid. The other guy who was with him has a newly adopted baby. So for all of us, it sucked, but for me, it's still the screaming, the knowing that what she was describing, the kiddo was probably deceased before she called. But the hardest part was the 45 minutes once the paramedics got on scene that they continued to work the kiddo until they told their dispatch in the notes that I can see as well what the outcome was. And you take that 45 minutes and you tell yourself, oh, it's going to be a save. It wasn't on Friday. It wasn't. But then you get the rest of the pieces. Foster mom, kiddo's mom wasn't even there. And so this child that she loved, that's not her own, and she hoped I would give her those instructions for something successful. But between the screams and the fact that it was the longest 45 minutes ever, you know, and them calling 911 seems long. But again, it was their worst day, and it becomes our everyday. But the worst part, too, on top of it all, is when we disconnect, you can get out, but the phone doesn't stop ringing. So we continue to imagine listening.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that so much.
So mine started early into my career, and it stuck with me. It had a good outcome, thank God, but this is one that really stuck with me a lot. As I was sitting on a normal day shift or a night shift, and I got a call from our mental health partners from our local mental health facility. Said, hey, we just got to hang up from this phone number. He was mad because he tried to call the hospital, said he was suicidal, and they wouldn't help him. So he called us, and I had to put him on hold 3 times to grab other lines. And the last time I got back to him, he goes, never mind, I'm in a dumpster, I slit my wrists, and I'm going to die. So good luck. And he handed me the phone number. So I call this number back, and I get an open line. I was like, hello, what's going on? Hello, is there anything I can do? And it disconnects. Second time I call back, and I'm like, don't hang up. Just don't hang up. Just listen to me. Let's talk about this. I want to be there for you. I want to help. And he says, nobody wants to help me. I've called everybody and everybody keeps hanging up on me. I said, no, I'm here. Don't hang up. Just talk to me. What's going on? And this kid he'd been kicked out of his family's house. And he said, I'm just tired. I can't do this anymore. Okay, where are you? I don't know where I am. Well, physically, what do you see? He says, I'm in a dumpster. I've slit my wrists. I'm cold. I'm tired. And we can't get phase 2 on it because he's in a dumpster. So we sent officers out listening for the sounds that I could hear on the call just so we could try and find him. Fortunately, I was able to get him to lean up and fall out of the dumpster so we could find an officer to get him. But it was 25 minutes of talking to a kid who's just saying, I'm freezing. I'm so tired. I'm so cold because nobody cares. And that one changed my whole career because now there is not a time when I don't care for these people.
Thank you.
My call was also early in my career, a smaller agency where we did everything. We answered the phones and we dispatched. And it was a lovely family on a beautiful day, and they were outside, and their 4-year-old had decided to run into the middle of the street. The caller that I got saw the little boy, and he said he's hit really bad. And so you go into EMD and emergency medical dispatch, and can you tell me if he's breathing? I don't know. Sir, can you take your face and put it down next to his mouth and tell me, can you feel any breath coming out? I don't know. Sir, can you look to see if his chest is rising? I need to know if he's getting any air. I don't know. I don't know. Finding out later what he had seen, this man was obviously in shock, and all he could tell me was that he didn't know. And so we dispatched paramedics, and they were there within a few minutes. My husband was the first officer on the scene. They scooped him up and put him in the ambulance. And that was the last I heard for a little while. I relieved the police dispatcher, at which time the police officers leaving the hospital had told me that the little boy had died. And there was nothing I could do except acknowledge 10-4. And you just keep going. I finally got a break 2 hours later. Somebody came in and said, does somebody need a break? I do. And I went outside, and I sat on the sidewalk, and I cried. And I cried for about 2 weeks more. And sadly, that call it's 24 years old. And I remember it like it was yesterday. The officers on the scene told me that the 16-year-old girl who was driving too fast through the neighborhood with a carload full of her friends with the radio up too loud had hit him. She was going so fast that his handprint was in the hood of her car. And knowing that there was nothing that I could do. And that's my call. That's the one.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm going to do my best because I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry. But imagine your routine CPR calls. We've all had them, good saves or not. And imagine the other side of the line is your coworker. And your coworker is calling in on a routine day on their way into your dispatch center. And their mom's gone into cardiac arrest. Well, I wasn't the caller, or I wasn't the dispatcher. I was the caller. Calling into my own center, my mother went into cardiac arrest, pulled her out of the car at 5 o'clock in the morning, and told my dispatcher, I need to do CPR. I don't know how to do it. I've done many CPR calls, been totally fine. And my dispatcher on the other line said, no, you know how to do this. She fumbled and couldn't find the instructions. I had to figure it out. I did CPR. Thankfully, she survived, and everything's fine, but it was the worst and most insanely long 7 minutes of my life. And it's just interesting. I couldn't figure out where I was at. I couldn't figure out the street name that I drive to work every single day. I couldn't figure out the street name that my daughter's daycare is on. Couldn't figure out the street name that I grew up in the city. I could not figure it out. So it's a different perspective when you put yourself into those shoes. And then my very first call back to work, unfortunately, was a open line with people just screaming. Obviously, we knew something was wrong, so we automatically send police. We get them started. Finally get someone on the line who's not involved. He's like, I don't know, it's some kiddo in a lake. Like, okay, what's going on? I don't know, over and over and over again. Finally get him to get the mom involved on the phone. It's her 3-year-old, and I also have a 3-year-old who had been in the lake for 13 minutes and had drowned. And so we're giving instructions, and I got up, and after that call, went into Not Ready, and I walked out, and I went to my car, and I realized my keys were in my pocket because I wasn't going back. But my coat was upstairs in the dispatch center, and I thank God every day that happened, because it was the hardest 2 calls ever. But we're all here for a reason, and it takes a special person in each one of you. I'm proud to be your peers. I'm proud of all of you, because you can do it even when you don't think you can. You can do it. We are 911, and we're important.
Thank you very much.
I wrote mine down. I heard you crying in the background as your mom told me that her brother had just raped you. I didn't expect your mom to hand the phone to you. When you got on the phone, you had the smallest voice. You told me how he had raped you and told you to shut up and not scream. It all started because he asked you to get Jack in the Box with him and took you into his RV just feet away from your parents in the house. I tried to keep you calm as the police were there. I asked you how old you were, and you said you were only 12, but your birthday is in June. Happy birthday to the smallest and strongest survivor I've ever spoken to.
This is about a call I made at the request of a sergeant on the scene. There was a suicidal subject held in his house, barricaded himself in his house, and he was trying to entice officers into the house so he could shoot them. And the sergeant asked us if we had a cell phone number, so I called. And I'm 10 months in, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be a hero. And this guy answered, and he thought I was an officer trying to entice me into the house. And I was just asking him to come out, you know, put the gun down, come out the front door. And he set the phone down, looked out the window and started screaming and shooting. And he walked to the back, he ran to the back door, almost shot one of our officers, and he was neutralized at that point. But I heard that man die. I stayed on the line long enough to hear that. Yeah, that'll stick. Stick with me.
Thank you.
I'm from a completely different country, but we are 911, and we go through the same things daily. Mine is mother killed her 6-year-old daughter. I wasn't even in the room, and it stayed with me because I listened to the recording. It was a police officer's wife. She cut off her hair that day. The child was asking the dad to come to work with him. He said no. He locked her in a room, his room. I think they were having some marital issues. While he was at work, he said to another female, "What happens when a woman cuts off her hair just like that?" And the other police officer, a woman, said to him, "Go home." He went home, and all you heard over the radio was, "Central, I need help. I think my wife killed my daughter. There's blood everywhere." In the dead silence of the night, about 2 a.m. in the morning. We sent everybody. I'm from a small island, and we sent everybody. We found her on a cliff. She was standing there, child child wrapped in a sheet. And she was saying Jesus said to sacrifice the child. It was borne out later that she held the child from behind and stabbed her 62 times. That has never left me. I am 911.
Thank you.
I'm going to read mine so I don't get too emotional. Many of you have seen what I've been walking around with these last few days, and you deserve to know why. He is my Wilson. After 11 years of being the primary caregiver for my mother, as she suffered from dementia, it turned out the years of dealing with a certain difficult caller would end up helping me. This caller would often push my last nerve numerous times. She would almost win. As my mother progressed through the early years of dementia, she pushed my last nerve numerous times. She also almost won. I was storing a large amount of anger for what she was going through. Anger of 24 years of dealing with callers, dealing with that caller. Turns out that she taught me, as she had the same mannerisms as my mother. She actually prepared me with how to deal with my mother. As my mother was in the last few weeks of her life, I was learning how to declutter my office, my home, through a class through Adam Tim. And as I was cleaning out my basement, I came across my basic telecommunicator book from 1997. It was actually sitting on top of a bowling ball, and sitting next to it was a headset. And the way the holes were of the bowling ball, I kind of saw a face with the headset, and I kind of thought, hey, that looks kind of neat. Suddenly, I found a place to take care of my anger. I found a way to channel my anger through exercise by carrying around this ball. Many people ask me how much it weighs, and I tell them, well, it's a full 15-pound ball. They ask why I just don't use a lighter ball. The average weight of a human head is between 8 and 11 pounds. I don't need to know or be reminded again about comparing that weight. I don't need that trigger. In the end, you never know where the help is going to come from in your life. Mine came from combining my two passions, bowling and 911. I am 911. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here in support of each other, sharing these stories. It might not seem like it, but we do get a lot out of this. Sharing, finally, opening up. I used to bury all of my calls. And it messed me up. What was therapeutic for me was to do what we are doing right now. To share stories. All of this started out from my own struggle. I didn't want anybody else to have to do the same thing. Because it's not weak to be asking for help or to share these stories. There's more courage and bravery in it. Look at what we've done here today. A round of applause, please, for everyone who shared a story.
I want to thank all of you, once again, for joining me for Imagine Listening. It's hard to explain, and I know I say this all the time, but it's true. It is hard to explain what it is truly like to be in this room with people who know exactly what it is that you're dealing with. And even if you don't come from public safety, you're listening as someone from the outside looking in, you can definitely feel the impact of these powerful stories. Hard stories, but powerful ones. This is what it's like within the trenches of 911. To imagine listening calls like this. These are the ones that stick with us. There's a lot of bad in 911, but there's a lot of good as well. And again, I just thank you for being there. And if you didn't share a story, it is okay, because you were there in support of your brothers and sisters of the Thin Gold Line. All of you make up the I Am 911 movement. And that's why this is so amazing. So again, thank you for being there. And thank you to NENA for reaching out and asking if I would do this session at their national conference. It was an honor, as always. If you have any comments or questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us. And that'll be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy and Carbine. Shout out to the patrons as always. If you are looking for bonus content, you can check us out, patreon.com/WTT podcast. This can be seen on YouTube, Twitter, as well as Facebook. And then you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.